Good evening, everyone. Thank you very much for joining this very, as we can see, phenomenal event tonight, especially very dramatically after Typhoon Signal 8 and the Black Rainstorm. And now we have gathered here to celebrate translation with a very established man here who needs no introduction, I believe, Professor John Minford. Thank you very much for coming here to give your talk. Before we start, I'd like to invite our Vice President in Teaching and Learning, Dr. Albert Chow, also Acting Dean of Arts, to give us a welcome remarks. Thank you.
College students, welcome. If you are from outside BU, welcome to BU. Well, our students never surprise me. Okay, today is a day of storm and rain, and we have no class. And we still have so many students. So that speaks, well, the weight of tonight's talk, as well as how motivated our students are. They always make us proud. Okay. Well, Professor Minford, welcome to BU again. I know you are a long-time friend. And tonight's talk is actually a joint initiative between HKBU, CU Library, and Hong Kong Translation Society. It is actually part of a bigger series, but I'm not going to spend too much time on it because I know you are coming for Professor Minford's talk. Now, I don't need to introduce Professor Minford. Everyone knows him. He is a very renowned sinologist and literary translator. He has translated many great Chinese classics, such as The Story of the Stone, Yi Ching, Liao Jia, and then collaborated with Professor David Cox on the translation of The Story of the Red Chamber. So these are very important works. I'm very embarrassed and ashamed because not even to talk about translation. I have to confess I have not read all these Chinese classics myself. So this is amazing that you have translated so many of them. Indeed, Professor Minford is the best person to talk about Professor David Cox's work because he's both Professor Cox's student and son-in-law. So who would be more fitting to speak on this great historical figure in translation. And then Professor Minford has also held many teaching positions in the mainland, Hong Kong, Australia, New Zealand, and he's also an honorary fellow of the Hong Kong Translation Society. And he was also awarded the inaugural medal for excellence in translation by the Australian Academy of Humanities. So tonight we are very delighted for him to speak to us on this topic, David Cox, The Art of Translation. And besides Professor Minford, I would also like to extend our warmest welcome to Ms. Caroline Cox, the daughter of Professor David Cox, to the audience. So without further ado, I'll pass the time back to Janice. Okay.
Next, let me invite Professor Mark Shuttleworth to give his words of appreciation to Professor Minford.
Thank you very much, Janice, and it's great to see so many of you here this evening, and thank you very much for making that special effort to turn out to what you and I all know is going to be a very memorable event. So if I may just briefly reiterate what Dr. Chow has said, we have very great pleasure in welcoming back to us Professor John Minford. We were lucky enough to entice him over here back in April for a very memorable talk, so we're doubly lucky to have him over twice in one calendar year. So I'm really looking forward to a huge treat this evening. And Dr. Chow has already enumerated his many achievements, not least as a very distinguished literary translator. I think possibly most notably, I'm not qualified to say, but to my mind anyway, most notably as one of the two people who produced this monumental, or I should say, translation of the monumental work Hong Lung, known sometimes as A Dream of the Red Chamber, but in the translation that he produced with his teacher, his friend, his mentor, and his father-in-law, Professor David Hawkes, known as The Story of the Stone. And it is, you're going to be talking not about your own work, you're going to be talking about the work of David Hawkes this evening, the translation work of David Hawkes. You will be, I think we'll be seeing plenty of illustrations of his translation approach, principally from that work. Yes, a very warm welcome to Caroline, David Hawkes' daughter. It is really great to have you here this evening.
Thank you.
Without any more ado, let me hand over to you, John. Thank you.
Thank you very much. Professor Minford, the floor is yours.
Thank you. Hopefully the floor won't be mine in too close quarters. I mean, I'll try and stay upright. Thank you, Mark. Thank you, Vice Chancellor. Thank you, everybody here, Janice and Elsie, who made me sign about 150 books this afternoon, and all my friends from the Library of Chinese University, who've been such wonderful hosts. It's just lovely to be back at Baptist University. I've always had a very good feeling here. I was very good friends with Martha Jung, who was here for many, many years, and of course Jane Lai, and I go back a long way with Baptist University. Now, is my voice coming across clear? I have to say I'm in a state of shock, because I've just been visiting the visualization center of this university, and very kindly shown around it by the kind of guru, the kind of, it's like going on, you know, it's like Doctor Who or Star Wars or something, and I'm trying to get back down to earth, because I'm just talking about old-fashioned things called books and words, you know, but I've just been on a tour of the universe with the great magician. I'm sitting down there, and I'm still not quite back on the ground, so forgive me if my mind is a little bit, you know, askew. I'm talking today about a very great translator, but I'm not going to repeat the kind of stuff I've done before, you know, what he did, where he was born. I want to really try to, as I recreated this talk, I want to try to get to the heart of the matter, which is, what is it that makes a great translator tick, you know? How does this person become such an extraordinarily gifted translator? What is going on inside his mind, inside his heart? And that's very difficult. I knew him very well. He was my friend, my father-in-law, my teacher, my collaborator, and so on. And I've read every word he's ever written. But to understand the processes that are going on inside his mind would require some kind of magical tool. Perhaps Geoffrey could invent some sort of meta-universe that would enable me to probe the mind of this lovely person. I'm not going to ask him to do that, though, because I've never returned from that journey. I've called this talk, I've given it a subtitle, which really gives away the entire message of my talk. Maybe I don't need to go any further than that than this first page, because I've called it Self-Cultivation, which in Chinese is Xiuyang, Creativity, Mischief, and Freedom, or the Alchemy of Transformation. That is basically my theme. And I'm going to try to, I've got a huge amount of stuff which I probably won't get through, so forgive me if I don't manage to cover it all. And please tell me if my voice is not clear enough. Janice, will you alert me, because I can't hear myself, you know, from the back. I thought I'd start by talking about somebody completely different. Sir Thomas Urquhart, who lived in the 17th century and was perhaps one of England's greatest ever translators. He translated the great French writer Rabelais. And the translation is simply transcendental. It's one of the most superb translations ever written in English. If anything, Urquhart surpasses Rabelais. It's quite extraordinary. And a critic once wrote that the reason he was so good was because there was a perfect match of temperament between the author and the translator. Urquhart was completely out of control. he just couldn't say one thing 4 times, he had to say it 10 times. And he went overboard, and it was actually a wonderful translation, very, very free, and yet never departing from the spirit. Now this is the kind of man we're talking about today with Professor Hawkes. And you see, I think very interestingly, the legend has it that Sir Thomas died. He was a staunch royalist supporter of the Stuarts against that horrible man Oliver Cromwell. And he died laughing when he heard of the restoration of Charles II. He had a fit of laughter and immediately died. And that is how I think a great translator would always like to die. I'd like to die like that, but I won't have a chance. I won't say what would make me laugh, because that wouldn't be appropriate today. And, all right, but let's get to David now. I mean, David Hawkes hardly ever spoke about his work. I mean, he liked to get on with the actual job of translation. Excuse me, I'm going to put my stick down because it actually prevented me from holding the microphone. There we go. Yeah, he hardly ever spoke about his work. He never wrote about it. And the only exceptions are 2. One is when I sent my student from Hong Kong Polytechnic, Connie Chan. I sent her to Oxford to do a video, to do an interview with him, an audio interview in 1998. And you know, I kind of cheated because I knew that David would like her. She's a very, very sweet person. And he said to me afterwards, you know, I couldn't help it. She was so nice. I just had to sit down and talk. So she recorded a whole interview with him, which goes into her master's thesis. It's in the library. And so that was a wonderful record. The other one was in 2007, when I went there and recorded a video with him. I cheated by saying, please would you let me practice my new camera? And he said, okay. And he sat down for an hour. And that video is now in the exhibition at the Chinese University Library. So those are the only 2 occasions, really, when he talked about his work. And in that first interview with Connie, he said quite clearly, I don't have any principle, I don't have any rules of translation, I have no theory, I have no principles. These are his actual words. You ask questions about principles and things like that. I don't know whether I've got any principles. I suppose I've got some sort of vague principles, but so much of what I did, insofar as I had any rules, they were rules I made for translating that specific novel from Roman, because of its problems, the problems it presented. So he was saying that basically every method he thought up he thought it up for that book, not for any other book. And then he talked about why he did it. These are priceless documents because he hardly ever talked about it. He said, I felt when I started translating it, I enjoyed it so much that I thought I'd like to do a translation where I don't have to think about academic considerations. You see, by this time he'd resigned his chair at Oxford University and he wanted to get away from all of that, all of the academic world, all of the scholarly considerations. This was Penguins who were publishing it. I'll just think about how to present this book in such a way that I do the whole of it, but at the same time it's enjoyable for the English reader. They can get some pleasure. Now these are very simple words, you know, enjoyment, pleasure, but they're so important, much more important than many of the high-flown theories of translation. And I think also behind the 2 words, enjoyment and pleasure, is the more fundamental word, which really runs through everything I have to say, which is that he loved the book. He translated out of sheer love. And one of my teachers, Pierre Rickmans, once got up at a conference and said, the only thing that matters in translation is that you should love the book you translate. And in a sense, that's all I have to say today. Really. I could stop now and go and have a nice glass of wine, but I think I've got to do a bit more. I've got to earn my keep, right. There are lots of things that have been said about his strategies. I'm not going to get stuck on those. I'm going to go straight to the cut to the chase, you know. His approach was really what we call a reader-based approach. He didn't care about the scholars. He cared about the writer, of course. He cared about Cao Sui-chen, but he cared about people reading the book, you know, how they felt, whether they would get joy, whether they would learn from it, whether they would get pleasure out of it. And that's all he cared about. And in doing that, he showed himself to be a translator deeply concerned with the reader's need to have before him not a translation to study academically, but a novel to read and enjoy. And I could spend the rest of the talk going on about the difference between the two titles, Hong Meng and Shi Tou Ji, one of which means red chamber dream, literally, and the other means story of the stone. And why he chose the story of the stone? Quite simply because the red chamber dream is so misleading. I mean, the colour red, for example, in Europe, mostly signifies blood and danger and stuff like that. Whereas in the Chinese world, it's a very, very positive colour, signifying beauty, prosperity, and so on, and happiness. And so he was very against the idea of using that title because it was so misleading. It makes you think it's a novel about a lady in a red boudoir, you know, and having an erotic dream. Well, unfortunately, there are not very many such episodes in the novel. It's not an erotic novel. If you want that, you better go to Jin Ping Mei, you know, which is quiet, which we won't discuss in present company. So he chose the story of the stone because it's not misleading. It's terribly simple. It's like the tale of a tub, you know. It's very alliterative, and a stone is a stone is a stone, you know. And whether it's a Chinese stone or an Indian stone or a French stone, so therefore it's a kind of universal title, and he chose that very wisely, I think. And this is all about the colour red. I'm not going to stop on that. Now, I think this is an important point, so I will linger a bit on this one. The novel Hong Meng or Shi Tou Ji, like so much of Chinese classical literature, is absolutely riddled with multiple meanings, layers of meaning, ambiguities, plays on words. The Chinese language lends itself, classical Chinese, and although Hong Meng is written in Baihua, it's written in a very classical kind of Baihua, and it's full of poetry. And this kind of language is absolutely dependent on allusion and multiple meanings. The same word can mean sometimes 5 different things, and you don't necessarily have to choose. That's the wonderful thing about Chinese poetry, is that the same poem can often mean 5 different things, and you just have to allow them all to coexist. Whereas the translator, poor fellow, has to make choices, because English does not have the same rich ability to be ambiguous. English can be ambiguous, and interestingly enough, one of David's great friends was the poet William Anson, who wrote a famous book called The 7 Types of Ambiguity, in which he stressed how much ambiguity there is in literature. And that book had a very profound influence on David Hawkes. Now, one of the first examples of this kind of multiple meaning in the novel is on the very first page, when the stone, the famous stone that is supposed to be incarnated in Jiao Baoyu, is lying at the bottom of a peak. And the peak is called Qing Gong Feng, which literally means green ridged peak. But if you look at the red ink commentaries on the novel, they tell you that those words, Qing Gong, are actually homophones with the word Qing meaning love and Geng meaning root. In other words, in naming this mountain the Green Ridge Peak, the author was also saying that at the root of this stone's incarnational experience was love. And love with all of its obstacles to enlightenment, with all of its richness of experience. It was in fact, it says on the first page, but not overtly, in a riddling, ambiguous way, this is going to be a book about love. It's going to be a book about how a stone goes into the world, becomes a human being, and experiences love. And as a result, becomes enlightened. That's the basic story. I mean, it's not a very good plot, really. If you're looking for plot, there's not a great deal of excitement or suspense. It just goes straight from one stone incarnation to the other one. But for a translator, this represents immediately on page 1 a big challenge. How do you get this across? And this is where Hawkes was just brilliant. He chose the word, I've got to get the right place on this thing, otherwise I'm going to completely mess you up. He chose the word green sickness peak. He called it green sickness peak. Now, a lot of people today have no idea what the word green sickness means. I mean, if you go into the hospital and say, oh, I've got green sickness, they're not going to exactly know how to treat you, you know. And of course, but up until about the 18th century, it was quite common. It simply means love sickness. Because apparently, in those days, young teenage girls, if they fell in love, they would have green sickness. They would want to chew chalk and various green things, you know, in order to relieve their kind of love sickness. So basically, green sickness means love sickness, but at the same time, it conveys that green ridge peak. So it's like a kind of it's like a tour de force. He's created another ambiguous expression that represents exactly the layers of meaning of the Chinese. You can't do that all the time. It's too much like hard work. But on this occasion, he really hit the jackpot. And I think it's always a good point to start with, to show that you can actually deal with ambiguity if you're really lucky. And in this case, he was really lucky. And also, green sickness most famously comes in Shakespeare's play Romeo and Juliet. In the first few scenes, it comes about 5 times, because Juliet is very much in love. And her father keeps calling her, you green sickness carrion, you know, which means you lovesick lump of meat. Not a very nice thing for a father to say about his teenage daughter, but the point is that's the classic place for green sickness. And this is something that David wrote in the introduction. He said, this is a very important paragraph, many of the symbols, the word plays, and secret patterns with which this novel abounds, they seem to be used out of sheer ebullience, as though the author was playing some sort of game with himself and didn't much care whether he was observed or not. Now that's very important. He's spotted the inner workings of his author's mind. Charles Mittin liked to play games with himself. He liked to invent riddles. He liked to create dreams. And I think we're starting to get some little insight into the mind of the translator, who also liked to do precisely that, and to fill his translation with interesting and quite refined allusions, which are not obvious at first sight. I'll be showing you some more later. Chinese devotees of the novel often continue to read and reread it throughout their lives. Chairman Mao Zedong said he read it 25 times. He was lying, of course. I mean, he lied a lot, that man. He probably read it once, maybe twice. Anyway, but Chinese people do read it again and again and again. I mean, I've read it many times, but I mean, it's a novel that you keep finding more things in, you know. It's full of hidden treasures, you know, like a child's game, you know. And they read it throughout their lives to discover more of these little private jokes each time they read it. Many such subtleties will, I fear, have vanished in translation. You know, he was able to keep one of them with green sickness, but you can't do that every time. It would take him about 100 years, you know. And alas. And this is the book by his friend William Emerson, which was very influential in causing him to see into levels of ambiguity and to try to reproduce them in English. Now, this is a very odd little example I want to linger on as well. But I'm just going to have a quick sip of water, if you excuse me. I haven't quite come down from the metaverse yet. Sorry, I'm going to give you a hard time, Jeff. There's a place in the novel where they're having a party. I think it's chapter 28. Yes, chapter 28. One of the great scenes of the novel, and some of you know the novel, some of you don't, but I'll very briefly describe it. Some young friends of the main character, Jia Baiyu, have a bit of a party. There's a man called Feng Ziying. His father's a big general, and they love having a bit of fun. So they invite lots of friends round for a drink, for a bit of a game and a bit of a drink. And amongst the ones they invite round is what I think we would call today, well, we would probably call her today a sex worker, but actually she was a sing-song, you know, a courtesan. And if you look at the bottom there, it says, called, her name was Nuageuse, or Yun-er, Cloudy, from the Budding Grove, a high-class establishment specializing in female entertainers, right? She was from a sing-song house. You probably don't know the origin of Sing Song Girl, do you? I bet you nobody knows it. it doesn't mean that they sang songs. It's because in Shanghai, in the flower houses, in the high-class brothels, the maids and the madame used to call the ladies xiansheng, right? But in Shanghai, it was sounded like sing-song, sing-song. And so the foreigners thought they were saying sing-song, but actually they were saying xiansheng, mister. You know, they would call mademoiselle, or whatever her name was, Wang Xiansheng, you know, there's a customer waiting for you downstairs, sing-song, you see. So that's how the word sing-song came about. It's got nothing to do with songs. Anyway, what the point is that in Chinese, you'll see it on the top line, Jin Xiangyuan, the Jinyu. She was a Jinyu from a place called the Jin Xiangyuan. Now, you know, Jin means brocade or beautiful embroidery, and Xiang means aroma. So, I mean, it should mean like beautiful aroma, but actually, he translated it as budding grove. And, you know, many times I read that and I thought, why? Why is he calling it budding grove? And then I just passed on because I couldn't think of the reason. It only occurred to me many years later, in fact after he died, so I haven't been able to check it with him, but I know I'm right. He called it that because in his favourite book, which is a French novel by Marcel Proust, the translator, Scott Moncrief, translates the second section of the novel within a budding grove. In French, it's à l'ombre des jeunes filles en fleurs, which actually means in the shadow of teenage menstruating girls. That's what it means in French. And Moncrief was rather sort of shocked by the meaning of the French. He just said within a budding grove. And budding grove actually was a line taken from a poem by an Irish poet, which begins within a budding grove and so on. It's about the birds singing. And David Hawkes very much liked this translation of Proust. And without any authorization from his author, he just decided to call this place the Budding Grove. Just to say, and by the way, I really like Proust, and I really like this translation, and if you don't get the point, you've missed something. But it's a little secret, you see. He just popped it in there. He could have said anything he liked. He could have said, you know, Hail Mary or something. I mean, he actually said the Budding Grove. It had nothing to do with the Chinese at all. Now that is either a huge mistake, which it isn't, or it's a stroke of genius, which I think it is, because it means throughout his translation there are lots and lots of hidden secrets. This is the man, he was very mischievous. He broke all the rules, except he didn't have any rules, so he didn't have any rules to break. He did whatever he liked. And the more I read it, the more I keep finding examples of his mischievous approach to translation. And many readers simply don't notice, especially Chinese readers. They have no idea what's going on. I've never seen anyone question the translation of Jin Xiangyuan as budding grove, but it's totally ridiculous. It doesn't mean budding grove at all. It neither means budding nor grove, but it's a reference to Marcel Proust. What's more, it's a reference to the old translation, which David far preferred to the new one. There's a new Penguin translation, which doesn't have the magic of the old one. So he's saying all kinds of secret things there. It's a kind of coded message, you know. The fun. The same party I was talking about, where the sing-song girl, Nuageuse, she's been invited along to make it a happy occasion, you know. There are boys there, boys and girls, they're all having a great time. They're all drinking a lot. And as the evening goes on, they have the idea of having a game, a drinking game, in which they make up poems and sing songs together. And the songs are quite sort of, you know, what you might call today jazzy, you know. They've got quite a kind of beat to them. And David really got into it, because he decided to make these songs, the kind of songs you can imagine somebody singing at your party, you know. And I'm not going to give you all of them, but, you know, they all started, and this is one of the songs sung by Nuageuse, the sing-song girl, right? She took up her lute and she began singing the following song. She's there with Xue Pan. Xue Pan is the naughty boy in the family. He's always doing bad things. I like Xue Pan a lot. He would be great fun. He would be great fun to spend the evening with, because he's always getting drunk and behaving badly. And in this case, he's the one who's with the sing-song girl, and he's always giving her a slap on the bottom. He would be Me Too'd in about 2 seconds, and he's often in trouble. Anyway, so she sings a song, and it goes like this: two lovely boys are both in love with me, and I can't get either from my mind. Both are so beautiful, so wonderful, so marvellous. To give up either one would be unkind. You can almost, I'm always about to break into song, you see. Last night I promised I would go to meet one of them in the garden where the roses grow. The other came to see me what he would find, and now that we three are all here in this tribunal, there are no more words I can come into mind. I mean, she runs out of words. And every song is like that, you see. She sings that one, and then later on, Bao Yu, the young man, the young sort of little Lord Fauntleroy, says, the girl's upset, the years pass by, but no one's claimed her yet. The girl looks glum, her true love's gone to follow ambition's drum. The girl feels blessed, the mirror shows her looks are at their best. The girl's content, long summer days in pleasant pastimes spent. I mean, another thing that you have to immediately understand about this man Hawkes, he knew how to write verse. Good old-fashioned rhyming verse. And I mean, he once said to me, you know, if I get stuck with a poem, I just get up from my desk, go outside and dig a few meters in my garden, you know, and dig the potatoes. And by the time I get back, I've thought of the rhyme, you know. That's a kind of what I call a working rhymer, you know, someone who knows how to rhyme. And then Nuages, the sing-song girl, she was always being asked to sing because that was her profession, you know. She sings another song. Still weeping tears of blood about our separation, little red love beams of my desolation. Still blooming flowers I see outside my window growing. Still awake in the dark, I hear the wind a-blowing. Still I can't forget those old hopes and fears. Still can't swallow food and drink, 'cause I'm choked with tears. Mirror, mirror on the wall, tell me it's not true. Do I look so thin and pale? Do I look so blue? Mirror, mirror, this long night, how shall I get through? Oh, 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 blue as the mist upon the distant mountains, blue as the water in the ever-flowing fountains. When I taught this novel at Melbourne University, I did sing them all, I sang them all, but I'm not doing it today because I haven't got time. I haven't got time. That's just my excuse. So, there's another song here which is, I think this is sung by the host, Feng Ziying. He says, you're so exciting, you're so inviting. You're my Mary Contrary, you're a crazy mad thing. You're my goddess, but oh, you're deaf to my praying. Why won't you listen to what I'm saying? If you don't believe me, make a small investigation. You'll soon find out the true depth of my admiration. I mean, it's absolutely made for, you know, to be put into a kind of 1960s song by, you know, Frank Sinatra or something. And then she sings another one. She was made to sing a lot, Nuages. She was obviously very pretty and very good at singing. A flower began to open in the month of May. Along came a honeybee to sport and play. He pushed and he squeezed to get inside, but he couldn't get in however hard he tried. So on the flower's lip he just hung around, playing the seesaw up and down. Oh, my honey sweet, oh, my sweet's a sin. If I don't open up, how will you get in? Not very politically correct, I'm afraid. But I mean, the point is that this is a translator who believes in having a bit of fun, you know. And Zhang Yuhan, he's an actor. He's also at the party. He plays the Dan role. He's the, you know, female impersonator, and he becomes a great friend of the main character. And because of his friendship with this actor, Jia Yu gets into terrible trouble with his father because, you know, these actors were, and nowadays we talk all the time about transgender, they were always dressing up in women's clothes. And Zhang Yuhan was a very romantic figure. He sang this song, a mischievous bundle of charm and love, or an angel come down from the skies above. Sweet 16 and so very green, yet eager to see all there is to be seen, etc., etc. In other words, I think I've made my point. When he had the challenge of writing, you know, popular songs, this translator about whom we're talking decided to just go the full mile, you know, and turn them into songs. Whereas almost any other translator would just leave them dead on the page, you know, and they're so singable and so much fun. This is just a single word. the word writ. Now, none of us use that word today, but in one of his translations he says, "My life in both worlds on this stone is writ. Pray who will copy it out and publish it." Now, you could say he's just struggling to find a rhyme, but actually, you know, the use of writ in that way, it was very common, certainly in Shakespeare's day, and here it comes in Antony and Cleopatra. So he likes to use words in a special kind of way, this translator we're talking about. His mind is, I'm trying to get into his mind, you see. I'm trying to see why he makes choices, which are sometimes very, very mischievous and very free, but also based on a huge amount of reading and knowledge. That's the other thing which we'll come to. Now, this is a very funny one. I had students working on this, and they spent the whole weekend trying to understand why he translated Zhen Guo as Ebanash. They sent me emails all weekend. What's going on, Professor Minford? What does he mean? What does he mean? And Zhen Guo means true country, right? It's all about a character who's met a foreign girl. It's the only foreign person in the whole. She had blonde hair, and she came from a country called Zhen Guo. And the whole point is that there was no such country. It was just made up, right? Now, if anyone can tell me why he used Ebanash, I'm going to give them a prize. It's an anagram. It's an anagram for has been. Because actually, has been never was, is the joke. I mean, it's a private joke, you know. If you were grading this as a paper in translation, you cross it out and say, what the hell are you saying? You know, translate, please. But this man doesn't need to obey rules. He creates his own rules. He does what he likes. He's mischievous and he's free. And thank goodness, because it took me actually several years to work out Ebanash. But I worked it out in the end. Because there was a famous novel written in the 19th century called Erewhon, which is an anagram for nowhere. So actually it's a reference to Erewhon, nowhere. And that was New Zealand. It was a novel about somebody going to New Zealand, which is actually, for most people, nowhere. You know, so far away, that's why I've just left it, actually. So Ebanash, a secret joke, again, from our mischievous translator. Now, all of this sounds very clever, and very inventive and naughty, but this is a novel with incredible depth, with incredible poetic and emotional depth. It's a novel about love, about adolescent love, about the human condition, really. And it's full of poetry. That's what makes it the most difficult novel to translate, is that every chapter has got poetry in it. Often it's the young people getting together, having a tea party, writing poems and so on. And it's hard. It's quite hard to read in Chinese, let alone to translate into English. Now, this is where David had a real advantage, because he had a really thorough training in the translation of Chinese poetry. He'd studied as a PhD student, as a graduate student, both at Beida and at Oxford. He studied the great anthology, the Chu Ci, the poems of Chu, you know, which are the earliest kind of romantic poetry in China. And then later on he read all the poems of Du Fu and Li Po. And he knew his poetry, but also he had a poetic soul himself. He had a very poetic turn of phrase. He had a very poetic, I would even say romantic, imagination. Now that's not something you would necessarily see if you met him in the street, but you can tell from the way he writes that this is what's going on in his mind. You see what I mean? It's hard to get into somebody's mind when they're already no longer with us. Even when they're with us, it's hard. But I can tell you, after many, many years of working with this man very closely, that he has a very strong poetic impulse, a very strong sense of poetic and romantic experience, and also a very deep knowledge of poetry, both in Chinese and in English, reading it all the time. And there are many examples of this in the novel, but I've just picked on one, which is towards the end of the first 80 chapters, when Zhao Baoyu writes a kind of elegy in memory of one of his favourite maids, Xingwen. And it's an extraordinary poem written in the style of the Chu Ci. And this is just a bit from it, you know. And very, very unusual words, very unusual mood. The mood is just like the mood of the Chu Ci, and it rhymes, and it's got these extraordinary words like gondolons and wyverns and chryselephantine car. It's a kind of piece of euphuistic poetry, and an absolute triumphant piece of verse. And it goes on for several pages. Not only a man who had the training in the Chu Ci, in what's called the Fu style of Chinese poetry, and a man who had the deep poetic understanding and determination to convey this into English. Only that person could do it, and I can think of nobody other than David Hawkes who would have been qualified. He had the Xiuyang. That's my other key word today, is the Xiuyang. And Xiuyang is a word that maybe needs a little bit of explaining. It means, it's usually translated as self-cultivation. It doesn't just mean looking at yourself in the mirror, you know, thinking how beautiful you are. That's not what it means at all. It means cultivating your inner soul, cultivating your cultural roots, understanding where you come from, reading, you know, old-fashioned things like books, you know, reading the literature of your culture. This is self-cultivation. And it was always part of Chinese education, because you had to read the classics. Believe me, you try reading the 13 classics. I mean, it's hard work. And you fail the exam, you read them all over again, and then you read the poetry, and you read, you know, and that's self-cultivation. It's also imbued with a philosophical dimension. Self-cultivation is also to do with understanding yourself, forming a philosophical framework for your life, whether that be Taoist or Buddhist or Confucian, it doesn't matter. It's having a degree of self-knowledge that, combined with your cultural education, creates you. It makes you able to do something like translate Huaman. And that's where Hawkes had the necessary Xiuyang. He didn't need to be told to go away and read some more books. He'd read so many already. You know, if he read an author, let's say Charles Dickens, he would just read every single novel written by Charles Dickens. Or if he read Henry James, he'd read all of Henry James. And he'd read the whole of, you know, Chaucer, just for the amusement. He read everything. And that he would often just be sitting there on his own. When he came to stay with me, he always sat outside in the courtyard reading a book. And that was part of his Xiuyang. And that's what I mentioned here. Without that, he would never have been able to rise to such heights as he did. Okay, now this is a little bit of archival trivia. There's a notebook which is in the archive at Chinese University Library, in which he describes his sabbatical year in Japan. It was actually before I met him in early 1967, when he went to Kyoto. And I happened to find it, that I found it very amusing, because it shows a side of this man which I never witnessed. I don't think his family ever witnessed it either. It says here, Bert phones from the street. Bert is Burton Watson, his friend, the American translator, phones, and we go to Snyder's place. Snyder is the American poet Gary Snyder. We go to Snyder's place by foot and bus. Philip Whelan, he was a friend of Gary Snyder's, is there. Lots of drinking and later drugs. I don't try the latter. And Philip gets a bit funny towards 1 or 2 a.m., but it passes over amicably, and we have some good talk. We all sleep on the floor. And I just like that, because it shows a side of his life that wasn't necessarily that commonly known, that he was capable of going and hanging out in Kyoto with the people who later became known by Jack Kerouac as the Dharma Bums. You know, these are kind of really off the beaten track. You know, and David was quite capable of mixing with them, because he had a freedom in his mind. There was this sense of it was in his mind. It wasn't in his everyday life, because in his everyday life he was quite quite mainstream, you know. But inside of him, he was on a kind of different track. And I like to use this motto from the 18th century society dilettanti, seria ludo, which means I play with serious things. You get involved with serious things like Hong Lamon. Nothing could be more serious than that huge novel, twice the length of War and Peace. But you play with it. You never stop having a sense of play, of mischief. And that's why you can translate Jin Sheng Yuan as budding grove, you know. It's got nothing to do with the Chinese at all. You're just being very naughty. You're playing with serious things. And this sense of play permeates the novel. I could give a whole lecture about it, but there's a very famous woman in chapter 21 named Do Gunyang, which means miss a lot, because she slept around, okay? And he decided to call her the mattress, okay? The mattress, because you know, she was very happy to welcome, you know, almost any of the gentlemen in the house. And he calls her the mattress, and he has a lot of fun with her. Her husband was called Droopy Do Hun Chung. And anyway, I can't unfortunately read all this, but basically it's slightly salacious, slightly naughty, because she's a rather badly behaved lady, and she ends up sleeping with Jia Lian, because his wife, Wang Xifeng, refuses to sleep with him. So in the end he goes off with Do Gunyang, or the mattress, right? And they have a nice jolly time together, which you can read later, I don't know. Well, we just have this. Now, this wife of Do Gunyang, the mattress, had a physical peculiarity, which was that as soon as the man's body came into contact with her own, she felt a delicious melting sensation invading her limbs, rendering her body soft and yielding to that of her partner. So that he had the impression of lying on a heap of down, not on a mattress, you see. And in addition to this natural endowment, she knew more tricks of posture and more ways of exciting a man with murmured lewdness and amorous cries than a professional prostitute. As Jia Lian lay on top of her, wishing he could melt into her body from sheer excess of pleasure, she began to exercise this last accomplishment. I mean, this is not a pornographic novel, but the point is that Hawkes is able to enter into these moments of mischief, you know, a bit of fun, you know. And you know, his great mentor, Arthur Waley, was once, he translated the great Japanese novel, The Tale of Genji, you know. And after that came out, his publisher, Sir Stanley Unwin, said to him, how about you translating this big Chinese novel called The Dream of the Red Chamber? And Arthur Waley said, no thanks, I've just finished one big novel, why would I start another? And David once said to me, he said, we're very lucky that Arthur Waley never translated the novel, because he wouldn't have enjoyed the naughty bits, you know. He was rather a prude, to use an old English word. He wouldn't have been able to write that scene about the mattress, for example. It wasn't his cup of tea, you know. And there's another scene here which we don't have time for, in the schoolroom, when the boys start, you know, feeling each other up. Again, David enters into it with great panache. It's a wonderful scene, I recommend it. Chapter 9 of the novel. If you want to go straight to a nice, easy read, go straight to chapter 9, where the boys in the schoolroom start being naughty. And David translates the whole thing. Now, how am I doing for time then? I don't have a watch here. 7:19, no, it can't be 7:19.
10 minutes to go.
10 minutes to go?
Yes.
Yikes. Okay. This is boring, but I need to mention it. The Chinese names. Now, most people here are Chinese, so it's not a problem to you. You can easily call each other by your Chinese names. But Westerners have real trouble with Chinese names. That's why in Hong Kong, you have this very civilized habit of giving each other European names, like, you know, Holly and Dolly and Polly and stuff like that. And, you know, I used to know somebody called Icy her name, or Lettuce Lee. I mean, you know, I think it's great, you know, but in China proper, I mean, in mainland, it's not so common. And with a novel, you know, David thought, oh my goodness, this is going to be such a turn-off, you know. People are going to open the page, they're going to be ching, ching, chong, chong, you know, and they won't know who the hell they are. So he decided to have bit of a game with it. So he called all the members of the family, the aristocrats, the guizu, he called them by their real names, like Jia Baoyu, or Xue Baochai, or Lin Dayu, right, as like Chinese names. But when he got to the maids, or the servants, he translated their names. So, for example, Ping Er, the maid of Wang Shifang, he called her Patience, and Hua Xiren, he called her Aroma, and Qingwen was Sky Bright. So, the minute you see that name, you know it's a servant. You know it's not a member of the family. And then with the religious people, the monks, he called them by Latin names, you know, Vanitas, Sapientia, you know, Misterioso. So then you knew they're religious people. And then all the actresses or sing-song girls, he used French words because, you know, English people always think the French are much naughtier. The French, you know, everything bad is French, you know, the French price, and so on. And all the brothels are French, you know. So all the sing-song girls like Nuageuse, they're called French. And the actresses, Parfumée, you know, or Élégante, they're all given French names because, you know, that's the demi-monde, and that's where all the bad people are. So this is fast. He was just playing a game, really, and saying, I don't care what people say. I'm not going to make every Chinese name come out in Chinese. It'll make the meal completely indigestible. You know, it's like saying you're going to have everything that's hard to read. So he tried to make it easier. But of course, he didn't call the main characters like Bao Yu. He didn't call them Edward or Jim. You know, that would have been totally ridiculous. You know. He just made up his own rules. Oh, this is a lovely one. You know, in the novel, those of you who've read it, they're always saying, 什么什么人笑道, they say with a smile. Almost every page somebody says with a smile. Now, if you translate it every time it's said with a smile, the reader's going to end up thinking that Chinese people just smile all the time. Which they don't, I can assure you, they don't smile all the time. But it's just a convention. So he decided to describe the smile, said with a puzzling smile, said with a bitter smile, whatever. Every smile he describes. And I said to him once, how do you justify that? It's not there in the Chinese, you know. He said, it's very simple. When you translate dialogue, you always feel there's something missing. You've lost something. The feeling behind the dialogue. So you know, I can just pop it in there as a kind of help. But that's taking freedom, you know. I'm absolutely 100% in favor of freedom. And that's what I mean. He's taken absolute freedom there. I once taught translation in Tianjin in northern China. And I had a student who translated a poem by Du Fu into English using a Shakespeare sonnet form. He made about 50 mistakes. I gave him A++ for the courage of making those mistakes. You know? Or just saying to hell with it, I'm going to have a go at writing a Shakespearean sonnet and getting it all wrong. But I mean, he just said absolutely, yeah. And this is a case where David broke all the rules and just said, I'm going to do it my way, you know, like Frank Sinatra. And he did it his way. And every smile is described. And it adds so much, it adds another dimension to the dialogue. That's the point. Okay, I'm going to skip that one. Now, in a sense, everything from now on in my talk is about one thing, which is to say, the translator has to be a kind of magician. Because what you're doing in translation is a very peculiar thing. You're actually changing something from one thing into another, which is what alchemists do. They take a common metal and they turn it into gold, you know. And translations are transforming. They are actually changing something completely. On the one hand, you know, Hong Mong is totally in Chinese, you know, from beginning to end, and there's virtually no reference to the West whatsoever. And then suddenly, they're all running around speaking English, you know. I mean, how ridiculous is that? You know, Jiamu is talking English, Bao Yu is talking English. They're all talking English, for crying out loud. When did they ever speak English in the 18th century? You know? Never. So what you're doing is a kind of, what the translator's doing is a form of what I call alchemy. It's a form of transmutation or recasting of something whereby it totally changes its outer appearance while maintaining its inner essence. And in order to do that, and this is where I'm being a little bit provocative, I'm saying in order to do that, you have to have a mind. The translator has to have a mind that's capable of going deep, deep down, like a form of meditation, like a Taoist, who learns to sing the Tianlai, the music of heaven, the transcendental music, which is beyond language, which is beyond culture, which is pure emotion, pure experience. That's why it's called music, because music is music. You don't have to translate Chopin to play it in China. You play it as it is. But words, unfortunately, have to be translated. They have to be changed. So there was a famous monk in the Song dynasty who was asked to define translation. What is translation? He said. His answer was very simple. Yi, it is change, as in Zhou Yi, Yi Jing. Translation is yi. Of course, he was playing with the sound of the word, to yi. But yi means to change. Of course, the modern word is hua, And so what a translator is doing is actually a form of alchemy, an inner alchemy. It's a form of kung fu, It's a form of nei gong, really. And that's where a true master, like a true master of kung fu, cultivates this ability over a whole lifetime until they can. I mean, my teacher, when I was a PhD student, Liu Cunren, he practiced Qigong, he practiced Jingzuo, and he used to, every time we met, every week, every Wednesday afternoon, we would practice that. Because he said that is what matters. That is what will enable you to understand literature, is if you're able to sit very quietly and enter into that mind. And this is where Professor Hawkes was truly unusual in that he was a very private individual. He didn't exhibit this in public at all, but he would sit in his study, and what was going on in his mind was a profound process of inner transformation, such as, which is the same as what a Taoist alchemist is achieving when and the word lian, meaning to refine or to transform, is the essence of the process. And that's where this man was a true master. In the same sense as you talk about a great master like Zhuangzi, a great deep thinking person whose imagination transcends borders. And I've got lots of this at the end. I haven't got time, unfortunately, but maybe I'll come back one day and talk about it, because this is all about. This is this one here, freedom, creativity, and the Tao of translation, you see, Yi Dao. It's all about freedom and creativity. And I would like to just read this section because it's so wonderful. This is from a commentary on the great Tao Te Ching by a man called Liu Yiming in the 18th century. And if you imagine the word translator instead of the word Taoist, then you'll see what I'm trying to say. The Taoist sees with the vision of spirit, Shen Jian Ye, darkly one with the Tao of heaven and nature. The Taoist understands everything with the inner eye, sees the Tao everywhere, in everything. To see this requires no effort, no action. It is perfected in silence, in true union with the Tao. And that is what I would call the inner music, the timeless art of translation, of which David Hawkes was a real master. And that is all I can say today, because the time's run out. I've got about 3 times more to say, but I'll have to leave you there. If you have questions, by all means ask.